Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, and CeeDee Lamb aren't the only wide receivers that have a chance to finish as the wide receiver one. We'll tell you who can do it on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKDOWNNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. You can also read her at Pro Football Focus and Behind the Steel Curtain. Usually Wednesday episodes are Matt Williamson's days, but he's off on vacation. He will be back next week. But on today's show, we're going to take a look at the 10 wide receivers that have a legitimate chance to finish as the overall wide receiver one in your fantasy leagues this year. But before we do that, Kate, let's talk about what makes a wide receiver one. What kind of stats do you need to have? What's the quarterback play that's needed to accomplish this? So what do we got?
Taking a look at the overall wide receiver one from the past 10 NFL seasons, they have averaged 19.42 fantasy points per game, averaged 163 targets, which amounts to 11.1 per game, just under 1,600 receiving yards, 12 touchdowns. Now, that has been the average. Now, obviously, kind of give and take. This is half PPR formats, but looking at the list, we have a bunch of repeaters. Devontae Adams finished as the overall wide receiver one in fantasy points per game twice. Had Antonio Brown finishes the overall wide receiver in fantasy points per game in 3 consecutive seasons from 2015 on through 2017. So you look at the points per game leaders over the past 2 years, Justin Jefferson and Tyreek Hill here in 2023. There's obviously a very good chance that they repeat, but when you're looking at this list, like what do these guys have in common? They are the focal point of their offense, which obviously leads to that high average in terms of targets. But we've got to talk about the big elephant in the room, which is that these are all guys who had really good quarterbacks.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty obvious. Of these 10 receivers that we've mentioned here, arguably the worst quarterback that was throwing the ball to this group was Eli Manning. And this is back in 2014 when Eli Manning had a 4,400-yard season and 30 touchdowns and led the Giants to the playoffs. Like, Eli was a really, really good quarterback. He wasn't a top 5 guy, but I think he was right inside the top 10 pretty comfortably. You look at the rest of the list, it's Ben Roethlisberger, it's Aaron Rodgers, it's Drew Brees, it's Kirk Cousins, it's Tua, it's Stafford. The other thing is you need your quarterback to stay healthy. Outside of that one season in 2019 where Drew Brees played, I think, 12 games and Teddy Bridgewater played the rest of them, if your quarterback goes down and misses a big chunk of time, it's going to be pretty hard for you to sustain that consistency game to game. So obviously, really good quarterback play, a healthy quarterback play will certainly put you in the conversation. The other thing, Kate, here is that almost all of these receivers, they didn't come out of nowhere, right? Like Tyreek Hill was a multi-time all-pro player before he led the league in fantasy points. Same for Justin Jefferson, same for Cooper Kupp. You're not getting players that are necessarily going from 800 yards to 1,600 yards and shocking the world. Like, you're pretty well established, which certainly narrows down the list quite a bit.
For sure. So let's go back and look at some more things that these number one wide receivers had in common. Not a single one of the wide receiver ones to play in the last 10 years averaged fewer than 10 targets per game. That's is an easy benchmark. None of them had fewer than 100 receptions on the season. None of them had fewer than 1,200 receiving yards. None of them averaged fewer than 84 receiving yards per game. And like, let's be real, 3 out of those 10 seasons, 7 out of those 10 seasons, they had 10 plus touchdowns. So again, that kind of goes back to the idea that, yes, this needs to be a fruitful offense. There needs to be volume opportunity. So that kind of feels like, yeah, it narrows things down a bit.
The targets are the big one for me. I mean, for you to have the average over 10 targets a game. I mean, we're looking at 160, 170, 180 targets on the season. And how many? All right, okay, let me ask you this. How many receivers do you think last year had over 170 targets?
Oof.
Because again, that's what you need to get to. You need to average over 10 targets a game.
4?
3. CeeDee
Okay.
Lamb,
Yeah.
Devontae Adams, and Tyreek Hill. That's it. I know it's sometimes that simple. It's but can you earn 10 to 11 targets weekly? And if you can do that, you're going to be right in the conversation to be wide receiver one. Obviously, CeeDee Lamb was close last year. Tyreek Hill just edged him out there. I wish it was more complicated than that, but it's pretty simple.
It is pretty simple, but it's a good exercise in terms of projecting overall upside. And I think this is a good exercise too. Like, we look at Justin Jefferson, right? And he's kind of a gimme in this situation, all pro wide receiver, but one with a rookie quarterbacks. Like,
Mhm.
this exercise of seeing what do these wide receivers have in common, I think is a helpful one, because it does help contextualize what we're going to get in 2024 and beyond.
I agree. The other thing with not all targets are created equal, obviously, right? If you have 180 targets from Dak Prescott, it's not the same as 180 targets from Aiden O'Connell. And that was some of the difference in the receivers last year, because even Devontae Adams had over
Poor Aiden
160.
O'Connell just catching strays over here,
No, I
Marcus.
mean, he's going to be fine. Don't worry. But we're just being real, right? 165 targets for Aiden O'Connell are not the same as 165 from Dak Prescott. So quality of targets do matter, but the sheer number is what I'm looking at. So how many receivers in the NFL right now do we think can get to 170 or 180 targets a season? When you start to really think about it that way, the list is very, very small.
The list definitely narrows, but I do think that there are some interesting names here. So, based on all of the qualifiers we've set, like, there are some gimme names. There's some easy, players that, yeah, if they finished as the overall wide receiver one, heck, some of them, a couple of them have done it before. Like, we're not going to be surprised. But I do think this qualifiers, they lend themselves to a couple of sleepers that maybe we're not considering as closely as we should.
All right, let's talk about the receivers that are no-brainer locks to be in the conversation for wide receiver one this year. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is now an authorized ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer that it gets to first pitch. And with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. They've made it so easy. You can save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy events, theater events near you, and save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or the event. And you can save even more when you choose a section and let Gametime choose your exact seats. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKDOWNNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKDOWNNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Are you having to turn down the volume because of all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that unnecessary screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Kate, let's dive into the easy wide receiver one candidates, and you guys know the names. It's the same receivers that have been leading this list over the last couple of years. Justin Jefferson, who has done it before, Tyreek Hill, who's done it before, CeeDee Lamb, who came up just short last year, Jamar Chase, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. What is the most interesting name for you on this list?
The most interesting name on this list for me is probably Justin Jefferson. And that's the case for a couple of reasons. Now, Justin Jefferson, obviously, from a talent perspective, there's no question marks, right? And, generally speaking, we're going to be drafting Justin Jefferson as the overall wide receiver one or the wide receiver two. Same goes for a dynasty startup, but averaged over 10 targets per game. He was one of just 6 wide receivers last year to have 10 or more targets per game average. But given the qualifiers that we looked at in the first segment and talking about okay, so it's not just the opportunity, which I think he's going to have plenty of opportunity, especially given the current injury with TJ Hawkinson. That could keep him on off the field for, some amount of time. Even when he returns, might not be 100%. That might bump Jefferson's target average by, a couple per game. 12 targets per game is not outside of the realm of possibility for Justin Jefferson this year.
Three targets a quarter. I could see that, right?
I very easily. And, everything seems primed, but the biggest question mark after looking at what these wide receiver ones have in common is the quarterback play. And what are you going to get out of either JJ McCarthy or Sam Darnold? I think JJ McCarthy has to be the one that starts, right? But he's not been named the starter yet. If Sam Darnold is the quarterback or even JJ McCarthy, will the quarterback play be enough to catapult him into the wide receiver one conversation? I'm starting to have a little bit nervous doubts.
Yeah, and I get it. The good news here is that we saw Justin Jefferson produce very well last year with Josh Dobbs, Nick Mullins, and Jaron Hall for a half, right? So it's not like we've only seen him with Kirk Cousins, and that's the only time he's produced. He's had some pretty poor quarterback play in the past and has still managed to find production. I think whether it's Sam Darnold or JJ McCarthy, those guys are both going to be upgrades over what we saw in the second half of last year. But if we're having to break ties here between Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb, I probably would go CeeDee Lamb just because of the quarterback continuity that CeeDee Lamb and the Cowboys have.
I think that's very fair. Now, Tyreek Hill, I don't think anybody has questions about Tyreek Hill, and we know exactly what we're going to get. We're going to get a high upside receiver. Doesn't matter that Jalen Waddle is in the mix because the quality of quarterback play and the overall efficiency of Tua Tagovailoa as a passer makes it very conducive for Tyreek Hill to produce like a maniac. Jamar Chase is an interesting name. He is the only player on this list, including, as we said, Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown. He is the only player, Jamar Chase, to not average 10 or more targets per game in 2023. Average 9.1 targets per game. That ranked 12th among wide receivers. Did manage 100 receptions, which we said was kind of this crucial mark, but 76 receiving yards per game, 7 touchdowns. Obviously, this offense was one that you kind of have to write off the Bengals in 2023 because of the Joe Burrow injury to start the year and then the Joe Burrow injury to finish the year. But if T. Higgins is on this team, which he finally signed his franchise tag, so we can kind of put that at the wayside here. He's not going to be a holdout. If T. Higgins is in this offense, do you think Jamar Chase's upside as the wide receiver one is capped?
Here's are my thoughts on Jamar Chase. I think without looking at the stats and just watching the receiver, right? Like I'm just going like pure football thoughts here. I kind of think Jamar Chase is the best receiver on this list. And I know he hasn't had the stats of Justin Jefferson or CeeDee Lamb or Tyreek Hill. I think he's the best overall player. But of these 5 names, he's the one that I trust the least to put up 170, 175 targets a season because you mentioned it, T. Higgins, right? Great number 2 receiver, arguably the best number 2 receiver in the league. But I'm just at a point with Joe Burrow where I don't know if I can trust him to stay healthy for a full season. And as good as Jake Browning played last year, there's still a significant drop off in his upside. So I think Chase can do it. I think things would have to fall right. There are, I think, 93 vacated targets now that Tyler Boyd is gone. We have seen Joe Burrow stay healthy for, a 16, 17 game season in the past. But I think there's so many other things that have to happen for Chase to do it that of these five, I'm probably putting him as the 5th most likely to end up as wide receiver 1.
Okay, out of this list, I before we head into our sleepers, I want you to rank them in terms of your confidence level that they could finish as the wide receiver 1.
I think Tyreek is at number 1. I think CeeDee Lamb is at 2. I think Jefferson would be 3, Amon-Ra at 4, and then Chase at 5. What about for you?
That's my exact order. I was really hoping we'd have something to debate there, but we don't. But I think that's a pretty fair characterization. And I'm going to be honest, this whole exercise kind of dampened my outlook on Justin Jefferson just a little bit because I had him as my overall wide receiver 1 for the season. And I think I'm going to have to flip my rankings around.
Although
I think CeeDee Lamb might be the guy.
And I won't be surprised if it's a little shaky off the start, whether it's, JJ McCarthy starting the year or if it's Sam Darnold. But I fully expect by the time we get to Thanksgiving, Jefferson is going to be putting up the most points per game of any of these receivers. I'm just not sure he can sustain it through an entire 17-game schedule. I did want to mention Tyreek for a second because Tyreek is the oldest of this group. You look at the rest of these receivers. Jefferson was drafted in 2020. Chase was drafted in 2021. CeeDee in 2020. Amon-Ra St. Brown in 2020. Tyreek Hill is getting up to the point in his career where we generally don't see 30-year-old wide receivers put up wide receiver 1 seasons. Does his age scare you at all?
No, I just looking at what he does year over year, there's no way that you could have watched him play football in 2023 and have any, reason for concern. He still has every bit of the speed. I don't have any concerns.
I'm not concerned.
Maybe the biggest of all would be like the injury concern and just the fact that he is getting older. Missed a game last year. I think it was with an ankle injury, but generally speaking, he's had back-to-back years with 17 plus 100 receiving yards.
He'll be fine.
He'll be fine.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about some sleeper wide receiver 1 candidates because, again, this is what you guys came here for. You knew those names off the top. Let's talk about the guys that are being drafted outside the top 5 or 6 receivers that actually could finish as the overall wide receiver 1 in 2024 next. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Everydayers, make sure you're checking out the channel on YouTube. If you're not watching with us on YouTube, you're missing out on some really cool graphics. So check those out. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. But Kate, let's dive into some sleepers because this is what we're really here for. Which receivers could shock us and become the overall wide receiver 1 this season?
Yes, let's get into these wide receiver 1 sleepers. I think to top it off, we have to talk about Philadelphia Eagles wide receiver A.J. Brown, who arguably could have made the easy wide receiver 1 list just based on skill, production, his position on a really good offense. But I think he falls to this sleeper category just based on the fact that he is sharing an offense with some really productive receiving weapons, right? They're dealing with, Devonta Smith. They're dealing with one of the best receiving tight ends in Dallas Goedert. This is a skill position group that is kind of flush with playmakers. So I think that in and of itself kind of brings that concern. Like, is he going to average enough targets per game? And that's probably the biggest question about AJ Brown that had him, on the sleeper list. But there's no doubt that the offense is going to be good enough and productive enough that the efficiency in and of itself might be all you need for AJ Brown to finish as the overall wide receiver one.
And I'm really excited about his fit with Kellen Moore. We saw last year, there was a stretch where he had over 125 yards in 6 straight games, which was an NFL record. I don't think he's going to be able to replicate that again, but this is a receiver that can absolutely go off for a 2-month stretch. And with him likely playing more in the slot, I think that's going to give him more touchdown opportunities. It's going to give him more opportunities to make plays after the catch. Kate, I think he has a better, I'm going to rephrase that. I believe that he has a better chance to finish as the overall wide receiver one than Jamar Chase, who was in the previous segment. So clearly I love AJ Brown. I think he's in for a massive season.
I think that's fair. Let's bump down the list here. Garrett Wilson is one of the easiest candidates here for, the wide receiver one conversation. Obviously, things have not gone particularly well for, the quarterback position here for the New York Jets. But you look at Garrett Wilson, what he's been able to accomplish despite that, back-to-back seasons with 1,000+ receiving yards. It hasn't necessarily produced in the touchdown department, but neither has the team. And then, you look at the upgrade at quarterback, like it's obviously going to be a very significant one. We already had Aaron Rodgers produce 2 wide receiver one seasons for Devontae Adams. He is, even if not fully healthy or not in his prime in terms of health coming off that Achilles, it's going to be the best quarterback Garrett Wilson has ever caught a pass from.
Yeah, and the name that sticks out for me here is Puka Nacua. I have Puka Nacua in almost every one of my dynasty leagues because I just think he's an awesome player. Plus, he's playing with Matthew Stafford, who has a history of funneling targets to one receiver. He made Cooper Kupp the overall wide receiver one in 2021. Calvin Johnson did it multiple times, not saying that Puka is Calvin Johnson, but Stafford does have a really good track record of being able to produce wide receiver one numbers. And you look at Puka Nacua's season last year, I mean, it was phenomenal. He had 105 catches, nearly 1,500 yards. Where he could get better is the touchdowns, only 6 touchdowns last year. I think there's a good chance that number could double. Cooper Kupp is, I think, 31 years old right now. And there was even a stretch last year, Kate, where Puka was averaging like 7 to 8 targets per game. I just think he's going to get more than that. I think he's too good of a player not to get double-digit targets every single week. I feel really good about his potential as finishing as the wide receiver one, and it wouldn't shock anybody if he did.
Yeah, I think where he definitely needs to grow, if he is going to finish as the overall wide receiver one, is just see more predominant usage inside the red zone. When both him and Cooper Kupp were on the field, definitely felt like there was more of a comfort level, which is very understandable with Cooper Kupp, but you want to see a little bit more involvement from Puka Nacua. Let's talk about our last 2 sleepers. So we've got Drake London, wide receiver for the Atlanta Falcons, who just got himself a big upgrade at quarterback, just like Garrett Wilson, who, now we have Kirk Cousins in the building. He's also produced a wide receiver one on this list of historical performers at the position. Produced a wide receiver one season for Justin Jefferson in 2022. We know he's an efficient passer, but he's been kind of in this position on a run first offense. And I think we might just see that script flip a little bit more favorably in terms of the passing volume. And again, that upgraded target, and quality of target cannot be overstated.
You guys know all the reasons why London is poised to have a big season. I don't need to go over them again. But one of the things that actually makes me feel more comfortable including London here is just the depth at the quarterback position. I mean, if Kirk Cousins goes down or is unable to come back from the Achilles injury, they have Michael Penix Jr., who is, by far the best backup quarterback on this list, Kate, who also has a history at Washington of absolutely just targeting the crap out of 1 or 2 receivers. That's why Rome Odunze put up massive numbers over there in Washington. So that makes me feel really good as well. He's also extremely young. When he was at USC, he was somebody that was averaging 13, 14 targets a game. He can handle a big workload. But I want to get to the last one here, Mike Evans, because of all these names, this is the one that I'm the most lukewarm about, but I want your thoughts here.
I think that's fair. Now, despite averaging just 8 targets per game last season, in his first year with a new quarterback who historically hasn't been able to necessarily support the volume that is needed for wide receiver 1 production, Mike Evans finishes the wide receiver 7 in fantasy points per game. Again, that 8 targets per game ranked 16th among wide receivers, but they were such an efficient pairing that I can't ignore between the touchdown upside and the upside just in terms of total yardage and target volume. That connection is going to be even stronger going into year 2. Like these two wanted to play together, and it seemed like that was kind of a given. Like they were going to bring Mike Evans back, but Mike Evans wanted Baker Mayfield back. I think this is going to be an interesting connection to watch blossom. Already had 13 receiving touchdowns that tied Tyreek Hill to lead the league. You don't think there's maybe a little bit more in the tank that is a little intriguing, or are you concerned about the change in OC? Are you?
No, not just, I really like Liam Cohen, who has a history of working with Baker Mayfield. He was worked under Sean McVay before. Like he knows how to funnel targets to a number 1 receiver. So that part doesn't concern me. It's just the age, Kate. Like at some point, I do wonder, like if these 30-year-old receivers are able to handle the amount of workload that's needed to be the overall wide receiver 1. That's the only real concern with me. I think the touchdown upside is there. I think the yardage upside is there because Mike Evans has always been a deep threat. It's just the overall target volume that I'm a little concerned about.
I think that's fair. Maybe what we see as, Mike Evans ages another year, he's going to turn 31 heading into this season. Maybe what we see is, generally him running fewer routes, but being targeted on a higher percentage of those routes. So basically when he's on the field, he's being utilized, which sometimes that's the kind of usage we see. Like Derrick Henry saw a massive drop off in terms of total snaps, but it didn't matter because he still got a ton of touches. I think that could be exactly what is in the mix for Mike Evans in 2024.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We post videos every day over there. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Go follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. Make sure you check her out at Pro Football Focus and Behind the Steel Curtain. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. You can read me at Pro Football Focus and the 33rd Team. And again, go follow the Locked On Dynasty Football podcast on Twitter as well. And we will see you guys next time.